All right, we're working on section 1B. All right, we're talking about logic. And so we're going to start with propositions. So the statement mathematics is fun is what type of statement? So a proposition is a statement that does two things. Number one, it makes a claim. And two, it makes the claim in the form of a sentence. That's all the proposition is. Math is fun makes the claim that math is fun, and mathematics is fun is a proposition. The answer is D. Number two, suppose the statement P or Q is true. Of what can you be certain? Right, so here's the claim. If you have a statement P or Q and it's true, it means that either P is true or Q is true or both are true, right? That is F. One or both of the statements are true. An or statement is true if either or both propositions are true, and false only if both propositions are false. So if I said I went to the store, so if I said I went to the store or I went home, now, if that statement is true, if this is true, that means that one of these two has to be true. And it can only be false if I did neither one of these. Number three, what is a proposition? Give a few examples and explain why each is a proposition. A proposition is a statement that makes a claim, either an assertion or a denial. It may either be true or false. So it may either be true or false. And it must be a sentence. A proposition is a statement that makes a claim. It may either be true or false, and it must have the structure of a complete sentence. Oh, let's see which ones are propositions. The sky is purple is a proposition. It makes a claim, and it's a complete sentence. I did not take the pencil. Makes a claim, and it's a complete sentence. The sun is shining. Makes a claim. Is a complete sentence. 2 doors down the hall is not a sentence. Four. Decide whether the following statement makes sense or is clearly true or does not make sense or is clearly false. My logical proposition is a question that you must answer. Propositions are not questions. The statement does not make sense because propositions are not questions. They are sentences. Decide whether the following statement makes sense or is clearly true or does not make sense or is clearly false. Explain your reasoning. We intend to catch him dead or alive. We're going to say that this statement makes sense because when the man the statement is referring to is caught, he will either be dead or alive. Determine if the following statement is a proposition and give an explanation. The king of hearts is the only king without a mustache on a standard playing deck. We are rolling with that. Yes, that is a proposition. It's a claim and it's a complete sentence. It could be either true or false. and it's a complete sentence. Determine if the following statement is a proposition and give an explanation. Choose super salad is not a sentence. Determine if the following statement is a proposition and give an explanation. Is the water cold? That is not a sentence. That is a question. The negation of a proposition. The negation of a proposition is just doing the opposite. There are 6 continents. The negation of the proposition is there are not 6 continents. The true value of the original proposition is false. Right? So there are actually not 6 continents. The truth value, there are 7 continents. The truth value of the negation, there are not 6 continents, that is actually true. There are not 6 continents. That's a true statement. There are actually 7. Write the negation of the given proposition, then state the truth value of the original proposition and its negation. September does not come before August. The negation of that is September does come before August. Does not come before August. Write the negation of the proposition. That is B. So the answer is C. September does come before August. The truth value of the given proposition, September does not come before August, that is a true statement. The true value of the negation is false. So we're saying that if a statement is true, then the negation is false. Explain the meaning of the given statement which contains a multiple negation. Then answer the question that follows. Sarah did not decline the offer to go to dinner. Did Sarah go to dinner? Well, this is a negative statement, and then we negate it. So when we negate a negative statement, it means that she probably did go. The first negation, decline the offer, makes it seem that Sarah would not go to dinner, but the statement negates this negation, did not decline the offer. Therefore, Sarah accepts the offer to go to dinner. Explain the meaning of the given statement which contains a multiple negation. Did the Congresswoman vote in favor of discrimination? The Congresswoman voted against the anti-discrimination bill. Well, anti is the negation of the discrimination bill, but then she voted against it, which makes it seem like she is for it. So the negation of a negation means that you're actually for the thing. The statement means that the Congresswoman did not vote in favor of a bill that does not favor discrimination, so she voted in favor of discrimination. Explain the meaning of the given statement which contains a multiple negation, then answer the question that follows. Paul denies that he opposes the plan to build a new dorm. Does Paul support building a new dorm? Well, there's a negation of planning to build a new dorm, but then he denies opposing it, so he actually is for it. The first negation, opposes the plan, makes it seem that Paul would not support the new dorm, but the statement negates this negation. Paul denies that he opposes the plan. Therefore, it seems that Paul supports the plan for the new dorm. The following propositions have the form P and Q. State P and Q, give the truth values, then determine whether the entire proposition is true or false. So when I say I am 5 feet 10 inches tall and I'm 41 years old, and if this is true, that means that both of these are true. So this is true and this is true. So an and statement can only be true if both statements are true, and if one of them is false, then the whole thing is false. Strawberries are vegetables and carrots are fruit. Let's take a look here. Strawberries are not vegetables. This whole thing is going to be false. And then we'll check to see in just a moment. Choose the correct statement. So P is this and Q is this. P and Q are statements. 14 is strawberries are vegetables. That's P. Q is carrots are fruit. That's D. The truth value of P is completely false. Strawberries are not vegetables. And the truth value of carrots or fruit is also false. Because one of the two statements, at least of an and statement, is false, that makes the whole thing false. The entire proposition is false because P is false and Q is false. The entire statement below connects two individual propositions with the word and. State the two individual propositions and, if possible, whether each is true or false. Then state whether the entire statement is true or false and explain why. 9 plus 10 is 19. That's true, and that's P. 8 times 7 is 56, and that is not 112. So that one is false. This whole thing is going to be false because one of the statements is false and it's an and statement. The first proposition is that 9 plus 10 is 19. The second proposition is that 8 times 7 is 112. The first proposition is true. The second proposition is false. That makes the whole thing false. The statement is false because the proposition is true. No, the statement is false because the first proposition is false and the second proposition, the first proposition is true and the second proposition is false. That is this one. The following statement has the form P and Q. State P and Q and give their truth values. Then determine whether the conjunction, the and statement, so conjunction just means and, is true or false and explain why. Saturn is a planet and the moon is a star. The moon is not a star and Saturn is a planet. This whole statement is false because the moon is not a star is false, and this is an and statement. The first statement is that the Saturn is a planet. That's true. Second statement is that the moon is a star. That's false. The true statement, the true value of P is true. The true value of Q is false. The whole statement is false. The conjunction is false because P was true and Q is false. The following statement has the form P and Q. State P and Q and give their truth values. Then determine whether the conjunction, the and statement, is true or false and explain why. All birds can fly and some fish live in the ocean. Not every bird can fly. The flamingo can't fly, I don't think, or an ostrich. There's some birds that can't fly. But we know that there are some fish that live in the ocean. Some birds can fly is not the first proposition. It is, or the first statement is, all birds can fly. Q is that some fish live in the ocean. The truth value of Q is false. The truth value, the truth value of P is false. The truth value of Q is true. Some fish do live in the ocean. This is an or statement. Wait, let me just make sure. Is this still an and statement? this is still an and statement. One of the statements is false. That makes the whole thing false. So the first P is false. Q is true. An or statement. So if I say, again, like I said before, if after class I'm going home, or I am, oh, this is a different question. State whether or is used in the inclusive or exclusive sense in the following proposition. So inclusive, so ors, so an inclusive or means that it's possible to do both things. An exclusive or means that when you execute this statement, that you have to pick one or the other. It's one or the other, not both. I live in town A or town B. I can only do one. I can't do both. State whether or is used in the inclusive or exclusive sense in the following proposition. If I had a puppy, I would walk him or take him on car rides. I can actually do both of those. 20. The following proposition has the form P or Q. State P and Q and give their truth value. Then determine whether the entire proposition is true or false and explain why. As we said earlier, if I could go home or go to Target after this, if this statement is true, that I went home or went to Target, that means that one of these is true. Only need one of these to be true in order for the whole statement to be true. Carrots are fruit or carrots are vegetables. This is a true statement because carrots are vegetables. That is a true statement, and I only need one of these two statements to be true in order for the whole statement to be true. P is that carrots are fruit. That's a false statement. Q is the statement that carrots are vegetables. That happens to be true. The true value of P, that carrots are fruit, is false. The true value of Q is true. The entire statement is true because at least one truth value of P and Q is true. At least one. The statement below connects two individual propositions with the word or. And we need one of them to work in order for this to be true. 4 times 5 is 40. That's false. 8 plus 8 is 16, not 15. That's also false. This whole thing is false. The first claim or the first statement is that 4 times 5 is 40. The second one is that 8 plus 8 is 15. That one's false. That one's false. The whole thing is false. The statement is false because the first proposition, the statement is false because the first proposition is false and the second proposition is also false. The following proposition has the form P or Q. State P and Q and give their true values. Then determine whether the entire proposition is true or false and explain why. Clouds talk or pigs fly. I'm worried about both of these. Neither one of these are true. State P and Q and give their true values. Choose the correct answer below. P is that clouds fly. P is false. Q is that pigs talk. Q is also false. So they're both false. I'm liking that. Determine whether the entire proposition is true or false and explain why. They're both false and it's an or statement. So that means the entire statement is false. So the entire proposition P or Q is false because both P, we're looking for false because both P and Q are false. Identify the hypothesis and conclusion in the following proposition and state their true values. Then determine whether the entire proposition is true or false. So if you have an if-then statement, it's if this, then this. This first statement is called the hypothesis. And then the thing that follows is the conclusion. If trout can swim, then trout are fish. And here we're talking about truth tables. So if you have P implies Q, if P is true and Q is true, then the whole statement together is true. The hypothesis is that trout can swim, which is true. The conclusion is trout are fish. That is true. That makes the entire proposition true. Identify the hypothesis and conclusion in the following proposition and state their truth values. Then determine whether the entire proposition is true or false. If bananas grow on trees, then bananas are fruit. If you have a proposition P implies Q, and the proposition P is true and the proposition Q is true, then the entire statement is true. The hypothesis is that bananas grow on trees, which is true. The conclusion is that bananas are fruit. That is true. And that makes the entire proposition true. Identify the hypothesis and conclusion in the following proposition and state their truth values. Then determine whether the entire proposition is true or false. If Tokyo is in Japan, then New York is in America. So you have a proposition and P is true and Q is false. That means that the whole statement is false. The hypothesis is that Tokyo is in Japan. That is true. Then the second proposition is New York is in America. I'm sorry, New York is in America. That is true. So the whole thing is true. Then New York is in America. That is true. So that makes the whole proposition true. Identify the hypothesis and conclusion in the following conditional statement and state their true values. Then determine whether the entire proposition is true or false. 3 times 6 is false. 3 plus 6 equals 9 is true. We have a proposition if the proposition P is false and the conclusion is true, then the entire statement is false. Yeah, no, I'm sorry. If the proposition, then the entire thing is true. The hypothesis is that 3 times 6 is 9. That is false. The conclusion is that 3 plus 6 is 9. The hypothesis is false. The truth value of the conclusion is true. The entire statement, the statement is true since the hypothesis is false and the conclusion is true. #27. Express this following statement in the form if P, then Q. Identify P and Q clearly. Whenever I go to class, I learn new things. If, then. If I go to class, then I learn new things. P, Q. If I go to class, then I learn new things. Which statement below is the correct wording of the given statement if P, then Q? If I go to class, then I learn new things. Express the following statement in the form if P, then Q. Identify P and Q clearly. No pain is a sufficient condition for no gain. No pain is enough to imply no gain. If no pain, then no gain. Right? If there is no pain, then there is no gain. If there is no pain, then there is no gain. 29. Express the following statement in the form if P, then Q. Identify P and Q clearly. No effort is a sufficient condition for no success. No effort. If you have no effort, then no success. If there's no effort, then there's no success. Write the converse, inverse, and contrapositive of the following propositions. All right, so let me go ahead and do an example. So P, then Q. All right, so I'm going to say that if class is over, then I go home. Then I have gone home. Okay. So the converse of this is this. It's Q implies P. So it would be the statement, if I have gone home, and then class is over. The converse happens when you switch the P and the Q. The converse, P implies Q is the original statement. The converse is Q implies P. The inverse, you don't switch them, but you just negate each one. Right, so if this was class is over, I've gone home, the inverse of that is that if class is not over, then I have not gone home. Okay. The contrapositive is the converse of the inverse. So it says that not Q implies not P. And it says that if I have not gone home, then class is not over. Okay. So the converse switches the order of the original statement and it negates each statement. The inverse just negates each statement, and the converse reverses the statements. If Jose has a family, then he has a mother. The converse, you simply switch them. If Jose has a mother, then he has a family. Switch them. The converse switches them. Identify the inverse. You need to negate, change both of these to the opposite. If Jose does not have a family, then he does not have a mother. Negate both of them. Identify the contrapositive, which reverses the statements and negates them. If Jose does not have a mother, then he does not have a family. Select all pairs of propositions that are logically equivalent. Select all pairs of propositions that are logically equivalent. The conditional and the contrapositive are always equivalent. And what's the other one that's equivalent that means the same thing? What's the converse? The converse says that if Jose has a mother, then he has a family. The inverse says that if Jose does not have a family, then he does not have a mother. Those are equivalent. Those are the same thing. The converse and the inverse. Write the converse, inverse, and contrapositive of the following propositions. Of these four propositions, state which pairs are equivalent. If Teresa works in San Diego, then she works in the West. The converse switches these two statements. If Teresa works in the West, then she works in San Diego. Reverse the two statements. The inverse, if Teresa does not work in San Diego, then she does not work in the West. Just making both of these, put knots on both of these. Identify the contrapositive, reverse the two, and negate them. If she does not work in the West, then she does not work in San Diego. Identify, select all pairs of propositions that are logically equivalent. The conditional and the contrapositive are always equivalent. And let's look at the converse and the inverse. If Teresa works in the West, then she works in San Diego. If Teresa does not work in San Diego, then she does not work in the West. The conditional, the inverse, and the converse are also equivalent. Rephrase the following statement using one or more conditional statements. If P, then Q. Without risk, you don't have reward. Without reward, you have nothing. If you don't have risk, then you don't have reward. If you don't have reward, then you have nothing. Rephrase the following statement using one or more conditional statements. If P, then Q. Even if you're pouring drinks at a restaurant, if you are excellent, everybody wants to be in your line. Rephrase the given statement with ifs and thens. If everyone does not know, if everyone wants to be in your line, if you are excellent at pouring drinks at a restaurant, then everyone will want to be in your line. For the game, write the following conditional statement in the form P is sufficient for Q and P is necessary for Q. If you believe, then you can achieve. Believing is sufficient for achieving. Believing is enough in order to get achieving. Choose the correct answer below. Achieving is necessary for believing. If you believe, then you can achieve. I mean, you get achieving when believing happens. Hope it helps.